Hi guys, welcome. My name is Otito. I'm the founder of the Story Lab. The Story Lab is motivated to understand the reasons and the factors influencing human choices regarding to careers, and we want to understand why we make these certain choices. We're not looking to prescribe what choices should be made, but we want to just ask questions that could maybe give room to a variety of thoughts into how we think about the choices we make, especially regarding to our careers, but in life in general. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Tristan Clemons, who is a professor of polymer science and engineering at the University of Southern Mississippi. He runs a research lab focused in biomaterials and polymers for applications like tissue regeneration and skin regeneration, as well as other things. He is also an ex-professional hockey player and an Emmy Award winner. And I have been fortunate to know Dr. Clemens for the past 4 years as a teacher and now as a friend. And I've learned a lot from him. And I feel there's a lot we can learn, at least be exposed to from his life. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Clemens today. Welcome.
Hey, Otito. Hey, thanks very much for having me on as one of your first guests here with Story Media. As I said on LinkedIn, I think it was, is the one thing that I've been that excites me and gets me going is passion, right? And I can see how
Yeah.
passionate you are about this project. So I'm just excited to support you in whatever way I can, and looking forward to this conversation. I know we've been trying to get this together for the last couple of months, and so it's nice
Yeah.
to finally be at this point and having that conversation. And thanks for those that are joining us live to kind of listen in to see what we're going to talk about here. Thanks.
No, thank you for accepting my invitation, and shout out to everyone that's on this live and so showing support, trying to learn. And I'm looking forward to learning more. And so let's jump right into it. So I started the Story Lab about the concepts, the vision to the Story Lab started about a year ago, and it came up when I had a lot of questions to what I wanted to do next. A lot of people in this audience, I met them through research. And I was always after my once I started my undergrad, I was really zoomed in. I want to go do a PhD. But as I began to approach that finish line, I began to question my motives and was it because I felt I had nothing else to do or was it out of prestige? I just wanted to know if there were other things I could do. And I had a lot of questions and it kind of slowed me down. And I've been trying to connect the dots and what my future would look like. And the questions have become a lot. So I've really wanted perspective, and that is really why I started this. So I want to take you back to think of Dr. Clemens. Oh, let's say Tristan at 16, 17.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't a doctor at
Yeah,
16.
definitely not. 16, 17. What do you think of career-wise? What are you thinking? Are you imagining this career in hockey, research, everything coming together? What is motivating you? What do you see for yourself going forward? And maybe what are the factors that are influencing the career choices you're about to make?
Yeah, great question. Let me think. So first of all, 16, 17 takes me back 2 decades, right? So we're going
Yeah.
20 years back in the past. That's kind of aging me right now. But yeah, I mean, I think 16, I was probably really keen on Mario Kart, girls, and my BMX bike. Probably was what I was thinking about the most, to be honest, right? 16 is a long time ago,
Yeah.
really. On the hockey journey, 16 is a pretty influential or important kind of pivot in the road for me. It was the first year that I made a state representative team, and I
Mm.
distinctly remember being in the car. So I'm from the southwest of Western Australia, kind of a small country town. We'd have to drive 2 hours to be in the state capital to do training camps and things like that. And so I remember the last trial for this state team being on a Sunday morning, being in the car, driving home with my mum, who was up early to take me to this trial in the morning in Perth, Western Australia. And it was the last cut. You know, if you're going to get through this, you make the team. If you don't, you're out. And I'd tried for state teams before that, but this was the first one where I was like, okay, if I don't make it, I think I'm done. I'm going to stop hockey, go play something else, and be finished. And if I think back now, 20 years ago, I made that team and then I made the next team and I kept making teams beyond that, right? But, to think I was pretty adamant that that was where I was going to finish up. And so if I didn't make that team, who knows what wouldn't have happened and transpired, to then go and play at the elite level for two different countries and represent both USA and Australia, all over the world was something I was very fortunate to be able to do in hockey. But at 16-year-old Tristan, poof, he was ready to throw it in, right? From a career standpoint, I knew I was good at science. I knew I was reasonably good at math and things like that. But, it wasn't, I didn't really know I wanted to be a PI, research PI at that time. It was more about, could I do medicine? Could I do engineering? Could I do teaching? These were the things I was thinking about at that time. And, yeah, I just really wanted to get out of my hometown, small country town. I like the idea of going to Perth with my mates and kind of getting into that sort of university college feel and lifestyle. And I knew that if my grades were good enough, that was the ticket to do that. So probably that's where the motivation was as a 16-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, great, great, great. So you talk about like hockey, and you were like in a somewhat defining position when it came to hockey with the trials. And I know like that's probably like demanding a lot from you. So at that time, how are you? And you're probably in school at the same time.
Yeah.
So you're giving a lot to hockey. How are you balancing school? Because I know to kind of get into these prestigious majors, you talk about medicine is you have to put in some time. So how do you balance the time you give to these things?
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was doing then as well is I had a little part-time job, right? So I also worked at a news agent. They're kind of not really a thing anymore, I guess, but like a place that sells newspapers, magazines, scratch tickets, lotto tickets, those things. And so my job, I was to get up early, get on my BMX bike, ride down to the local news agent. It's a couple of kilometers down the road, and I'd have to stack the newspapers before it opened, so get them in, stack them up, make
Yeah.
everything neat, and do that twice a week. And I think I was doing
Wow.
that for like 10 or $20, for the week. So I had the work part to fit in there as well. But I also look back on that and go, that's kind of all I had going on, right? It was catching up with mates, playing hockey, going to school, and maybe that little part-time job that was a couple of hours in the week. So if I think now where I'm at, 20 years on, family, research group, startup companies, other things like, life's way more complicated now. So I probably had enough time back then and just stuck it out. Yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. It's got to see, I hear how you were able to balance it, and I like the fact that from that at that time you're thinking hockey, you're also thinking regular career, and and a lot of us graduating college, people starting college, even graduating doctorate programs are like weighing this career options around now, and part of what has influenced my career choices, like thinking of when when I was in high school, it's like they ask you, what do you want to be? And you think of the idea of success and what success means. And part of, at some point, the question of how successful you wanted to be also began to overlap with how much money you wanted to make. And I think about these things and you think about recognition and fame. So I feel every field has its own type of success, right? And people be like, oh, I want to be successful, but success is kind of different in different fields. How different has being as successful. You went pro, you ended up making the team and going pro as a hockey player. And here you are today as a PI. So how do you compare this feeling of success when you have it in hockey to when you have it in research? And to add to that, you've won an Emmy. You've won an Emmy, and that is a successful feeling. How different were those feelings? And because I feel like the end reward is very much a strong attracting factor to when you want to enter a field. And how do those different feelings affect how people are attracted to that field? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is like if that's what's attracting you, maybe you're getting attracted for the wrong things, right?
Okay.
Straight off the bat, I think that's the first thing I'll say, and the reason being for that is like and the other thing we'll talk about is probably a lot of failures on the way. Like I was not, I mean, yeah, it's going to sound bad. I was a successful hockey player. I definitely achieved a lot of things in hockey, but I didn't achieve all the goals that I'd set for myself in hockey, right? There was a heap of failure in that space as well. A lot of missed teams once I made it for the Australian team, a lot of missed selections. I've never been to an Olympic Games, right? And I tell people that openly. I've never played in an Olympics. London, I was a little bit too short for, not quite ready, for the London 2012 Olympics. 2016 Rio was the one that I was aiming for. And I just wasn't good enough, right? Like elite sport is hard. I was a goalkeeper. I was probably the third best goalkeeper in Australia at the time, but only two of the goalkeepers go to the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Third best in Australia and maybe in the top 10 in the world, right? Because, Australia's a pretty competitive hockey team.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't get you to an Olympic Games if you're not there at the right spot and the right time. And so, Yeah, but I've also had a phenomenal amount of experiences and life opportunities, traveled all over the world with mates, played hockey in a lot of different countries, played professionally in India, those sorts of things. So, with reflection and looking back on my hockey career, like, yeah, of course it was successful and a lot of fun and super rewarding to go through that process. But in the moment, when you get knockbacks and when you're getting that phone call to say, hey, you're not on the plane to go to Rio from the coach, yeah, you feel like you failed, right? And you feel like it wasn't quite, meeting the expectation or the goal that you'd set yourself. So yeah, I would say that first of all, but I think for me, I mean, I'm a research PI. Like the financial gain of what you do with your PhD as a research PI isn't as good as what it could be if you're in the consulting world or sort of rising the ranks as engineers do and things like that. So I think you got to be motivated by something else to really drive in that respect. And but I say that now with a bit of hindsight that that's what I enjoy, and I know it lights me up, and that's what I get excited about. I love motivating people. I love working with students and trying to help them reach their potential. And research science at an academic institution gives me that opportunity day in, day out, right? That's why I like coaching too. I get that opportunity to, have people maybe not see where their potential is and help them find it, right? That's awesome. And you can still get that in industry jobs and other places, but here it happens, on the daily, right? Which I think is really, really cool. But with that, there's some sacrifice on the salary side, right? But
Yeah.
I say that now as a 37-year-old with hindsight to think back, and I'm in the job that I love and I'm right where I need to be. When I was Probably not when I was 16. As I said, I was still too busy worried about Mario Kart and GoldenEye and things like that. But probably once I got into my early 20s, you start to think about these things. Yeah, for sure. Um, I think one thing that kept me humble in that space is field hockey has is predominantly an amateur sport, right? Like it's not the sport where you're going to make, the money like a Major League Baseball player or an NFL player here in the US or a soccer player potentially that's playing internationally. So that came with some humility that you actually still just played for the love, right? And you played
Yeah.
because that's what you wanted to do and you like being there with your mates. I never really, you know, loved hockey like crazy. I loved what it brought to me in terms of the ability of like accomplishment, feeling like I've achieved something, working hard with the guys next to me. I loved the mateship that I got out of hockey. But it wasn't like I was a kid that grew up as a junior thinking about, I want to go play for Australia, right? It was like, okay, I'm going to try and make my local representative team. I'm going to try and make it so I can play with the seniors. Now I'm going to try and make that first state team. And then you just keep climbing the ranks because that just seems like the natural progression that's coming next, right? I didn't really um, sort of like aim as a 16-year-old, as a 10-year-old, bang, that's where I want to be, right? It kind of came just step after step after step.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Dre, I just wanted to highlight something you said, and you made a very, very important point. You said you never really like loved hockey, like not that you didn't like it, like dream about love it. So I want to compare it to when you're doing elite sports and you're competing against other people and in terms of performance. And do you think that that love of something has an effect on how well you do something?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So, I mean, like, I shouldn't say I didn't. I mean, I love sports, right? Absolutely love sports, passionate about team sports in particular, right? But I could have had that same passion as, probably not a soccer player. I don't like soccer that much, but like AFL football was one that I loved as a kid playing, baseball. I love baseball. And so I could have been playing those sports, I think, with the same vigor and sort of energy and discipline that I took into my hockey, right? It was just that hockey was the one that sort of started to progress well, and that's why I stayed there. But the things that sport give you in terms of, learning about yourself, the self-discipline, the team aspect, working with your teammates for a common goal. Those things are the things that fired me up, and I have much better appreciation for now from going through that hockey journey for sure.
Sure, for sure. I love that. I love that. And so your entire career so far has been this overlap of hockey and STEM, and then but in certain points of your life, you've probably had to prioritize something over the other, and maybe jump into new fields. And today you're running a startup, and I know you used to also run a sales business with making hats and
Oh
before
yeah.
in Australia. And so, in as much as you've really lived on this level of consistency, you've been a newbie a lot of times as well.
Yeah.
And for me, pivoting from one thing to another has always been seemed very like challenging. I've always been afraid of it. It's like so when I was applying to PhDs last year, I actually didn't want to apply to specifically materials engineering programs. I wanted to apply to some other programs that were similar but like kind of different. And I always thought that I wouldn't really be good enough by seen good enough by the applicants, by the application committee, as well as starting over. And I feel like a lot of people have this fear of starting over and not knowing much because, especially when you pride your life on like excellence and all of a sudden you're like the guy that knows nothing. How has that been? How do you give yourself the permission to say, okay, it's okay to be the newbie here? What's that in your mind? What
Yeah,
goes
great.
on?
Great question. Let's unpack that a little bit. There's a bunch in that, Otito. Yeah, and I appreciate that question. And think, one thing that's been great about getting ready for this sort of discussion with you is just the personal reflection I've taken to be able to do that, right?
Yeah,
And I think, people that like to achieve things, right? So, anyone in a PhD program and those, they're already in that sort of bucket of like, hey, I'm chasing something tough and really trying to get to that level. You sometimes get so focused on that goal that you stop or you don't take the time to stop and kind of smell the roses or reflect and see how you're going. You're just like, I'm getting the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I definitely operated like that for a long period of time and had to sort of pull back, or maybe I should say, as a work in progress, I am trying to learn how to get, that balance right when, maybe when the goal is a little bit more abstract, when the goal is not as clearly defined. It's easy as a hockey team to go, hey, we're trying to go to the Olympics, win a gold medal, right?
yeah,
It's easy as the research team to say, hey, we're going to try and publish this many papers and do this cool research, get this amount of research funding, when the metrics are clean and organized and balanced, right? The thing I'm struggling with now, like I guess like openly as well, is like on a family side, what does that look like, right? I've got two young girls, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. Love, being a dad and the family side of things, but the goals are a little bit harder to, they're a bit mushy, right? It's hard to put your hands on what success looks like in that
yeah,
space. And so then you just turn it up day in, day out, trying to do the best you can each day to make that work. But um, I think to your question, it really is about like how do you give yourself permission to go back and be the newbie. And you also kind of mentioned about sort of that sort of I don't really like the term, but imposter syndrome, right? Am I good enough to do that or
yeah,
get back into that space? So I think mentors are super important in that whole sort of ethos that you're talking about there, right? Because, we don't have all the answers, and I think before you start to think about making that big pivot or a big change, you should do your research, right? Like you should have those discussions with people that either, have your best interest at heart, right? A good
yeah,
mentor is someone that, isn't just someone who's done what you want to do or is experienced in this place you want to go. They've got to have your best interest at heart, right? And they've got to be willing to serve and give you that time to sort of get that to work out, right? So, and I think, I've had some phenomenal mentors along the way that have allowed me to sort of, bounce ideas off them and sort of understand if this could be a good direction to go next. It's a perfect time for me to probably mention my wife, Claire, right? Like, because, she's the one that gives me permission to do a lot of the things that I've, that when you look at a CV list, okay, they're all the things that have my name next to them. But, Claire's the one that allows me to do that, right? And I think,
yeah.
the perfect story that kind of epitomizes that. So when, take you back to not quite 16-year-old Tristan, but probably, man, I should know when we met. I don't know. It's like mid-20s, I guess we met. I think we're coming up on, yeah, we got 10-year wedding anniversaries this year. So we've been together for, I don't know, 14, 15 years, something like that.
Congrats, congrats.
Yeah, it's coming up. But I distinctly remember we first started dating. I'd had a serious relationship beforehand, had been single for a few months, and then we started dating. And I remember coming home, dropping Claire back at her house after being at the drive-in cinema, right? No one on this call knows what a drive-in cinema is anymore, but you like turn up with your car, have the speakers in, listen in. It's kind of romantic, right?
Really?
It was getting phased out when I was even as a teenager, but it was a cool thing to sort of have a throwback for us when I was younger. But I remember getting to the car and like she's getting out of the car and sort of, she's like, what are we doing? Is this serious or not? And I told her point blank, I was like, hey, hockey's my priority right now. If you're willing to sit like second seat for a while, then maybe there's a future here. Um, and I look back on that and we joke about it now, but like that was, you know, pretty arrogant. Like, I mean, I probably could have deserved to get slapped in the face. She could have easily walked away and finished off there, but I think she understood that that's where the drive was. And for me, it was super important, right? And I also think that, the fact that she stood by me through that, allowed me to sort of have that, focus and she was able to help with picking up some slack and still does around a lot of things that we have as a family sort of together with us, how that works. Yeah, she's allowed me to chase that dream as a hockey player. And then when the decision came, okay, let's move countries, go somewhere she's never been to before, right? And set up as a family in the US to chase the research dream. We
Yeah.
came across to Chicago about 7.5 years ago now, to set up as a postdoc, first of all at Northwestern.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, she was all for it, right? And again, she had to find new friends, make a new friend group, be a new mum, all in that period of time that I'm also doing those things and figuring out how to be a postdoc, right? It was, yeah, it's awesome to look back on it now and go, okay, look at the growth we've had. But I also totally acknowledge that that's not something I've done in a vacuum, right? That's been
Yeah.
done with her support, has been done with mentors saying, yeah, this could be good for your career. This is a good place to go next. And so I think, the advice piece that maybe comes on the end of all of that is find good people to surround yourself with and make sure you're not afraid to ask those questions of the people you think might have the answers.
I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that you hold on to the idea of having good people around you and having mentors. And like for me, the people, my twin brother being able to bounce up ideas and really like work with each other and we don't feel alone when we're stepping into new fields has been great. I've also had great mentors, so I love that. Well, I want to hold on to mentors again because I've also had like an issue with mentors. And so sometimes you get into this field and you have mentors and mentors kind of encourage you, but at the same time, again, there's situations where they set expectations for you, and and sometimes you feel like you're doing something and you're doing great at it, but you don't feel like doing something anymore. And like you said, when you had to move countries, you had to do things, and you don't want to disappoint somebody or you don't want to offend somebody. And sometimes I find myself staying in situations. Oh, I'm I want to leave. I want to make this change. Even I haven't even told my PI that I might not accept my graduate offer to U Chicago. I haven't that I might not go ahead with. I haven't told my PI. So I kind of struggle sometimes to let these mentors know these things because I don't want to disappoint them. And sometimes we stay longer in places we're supposed to have left. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, is like don't confuse mentors with bosses, right?
Okay.
Like, or, that I stand by that for sure. Like, and I've been fortunate to have opportunities where some of my greatest mentors have also been my bosses for a period of time.
Okay.
Way back to when I was 16 working at the newsagent, right? Like one of my very first bosses was the guy that gave me the job to stack the newspapers. And he taught me a lot about like financial education. We used to read the financial newspapers together, those sorts of things, and took some time to mentor me in those things, right? And so, I think it's fantastic when your boss is also your mentor, but they are fundamentally different things, right?
Yeah.
A boss or a PI, for example, in the research setting, if we bounce into that space, they're driven in seeing you sort of succeed, where you need to go to next in terms of like the academic side of things, right? As an
Yeah.
undergraduate, we're trying to make sure your grades are good, make sure you got a good CV building for research to get on and do what you need to do next, right? But that might not be what's in your best interest sometimes when you're thinking about academia versus industry and those sorts of things. And so it's good to have outside counsel on those sorts of challenging questions. I mean, my approach in with my research group is to be that mentor, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the important part. And it comes from trusting that person has your best interest at heart in the first place, right?
Yeah.
I love this trust equation. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's something I sort of talk to all of my students about, and this was introduced to me in hockey a while back now, back with sort of our own professional development as an athlete. But
Yeah.
the trust equation really is like, you think about it, it's literally an equation, math equation. Okay. Think about like the numerator is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, right? And I'll explain that in a little bit. And then the numerator is self-interest, right? And so if you think about, you got to maximize this equation to try and give yourself the most amount of trust. And think about this for a mentee-mentor relationship, right? So
Yeah.
like credibility is pretty much just, normally comes with experience. So someone who's been there before, has done what you want to do, that's where you get credibility from, right? Has the
Yeah.
CV, they've got the runs on the board, so to speak. Reliability is just, saying what you would do and do what you'll say. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like, I'm not all talk. I'm going to help you do this and actually being there in the lab to help the student when you say you're going to be there, right?
Yeah.
And then the intimacy part is just like the personal building of relationship, you know? So the more time you're together, right? Like, I mean, I now know more about before we got on this call, we were talking just about your brothers and where you're at and those
Yeah.
sorts of things. Like, that's taken another step up in our relationship in terms of like just, our interactions with each other, right?
Yeah.
And intimacy is built really by, spending time together, being in the same room together, talking about things outside of the professional aspects sometimes that you're actually connected with that person, right? Okay, you maximize those things, that starts to build trust. And the one thing
Yeah.
that erodes it though is your own self-interest, you know? And so if you think about trying to build trust in a mentee mentor relationship, well, that needs to have someone that has your best interest at heart, right? You can't be
Real.
someone who's like, me, 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 I need this, I want this. If you're trying to build that trust with your mentee, in my case, my research students and those sorts of things, right? And this is an equation that was sort of introduced to me, over a decade ago, but I've got it plastered on the wall in the labs. It's printed out there because it does help in terms of sort of understanding, that metric of that's so important because if you haven't got trust, then you're never going to believe me when I asked you to move out of your comfort zone or to do something new or take the pivot that you were talking about before, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but with that trust, you might be more willing to take those opportunities on. So
I love that. I actually love this trust equation. You might have to send it to me so I plaster it on my wall as well.
can do, man. I said I'll send you the exact PDF that's on my wall in the lab. No problem at all.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So I want us to go back into, so we're talking about different fields, and you talk about you're in polymers and you're a researcher and you're doing all this cool stuff, and as well you're doing hockey on the side. And oh, you're doing all this really good stuff, and sometimes you're gonna have to walk away from something. And like you walked away from hockey, maybe you retired, and then you started polymer research. And I don't really know the trajectory of your research, but sometimes your research groups you go this direction, and then you have to switch, and it's like, okay, this is not working anymore, and then we switch and we want to do something else, maybe something more interesting, maybe something more likely to produce results. And sometimes people interpret walking away as quitting. And sometimes you have this dilemma of when do I walk away or when do I keep going? And I everywhere on my timeline when I watch YouTube, it's be delusional, keep going, don't give up. But I saw this quote from Stephen Bartlett, and he said, let me pull it up. He said, quitting is for winners and quitting is for winners. And I'm not trying to encourage quitting, but I'm just trying to see how do you go with these different ideas? How do you know when to walk away and when walking away is not necessarily quitting, but finding a better direction? And how do you know when to stay and keep going? Because research is something that is very highly experimental. You could fail, but if you keep going the 1,000 times by Thomas Edison, people use that, you could find something great. But maybe you could switch perspectives and then another great thing comes up. So how do you know when you play this cards of staying and walking away?
Yeah, I mean, like I knew we were going to get to this when we sort of talked about the show notes, right? In terms of quitting versus failing, and I sort of have been ruminating on that the last week or so. Is that, I'm not a good quitter for
Mm,
sure, right? I'm pretty good at failing and changing direction though, and I think that we're built humans are built to have a fear of failure, right? And I think that's one thing that has given me maybe more robustness than others is through sport is, sport you're set up to fail all the time,
yeah,
right? And I think because I've failed multiple times in that arena, even though it's totally different in the research side, I'm more
yeah,
willing to fail on the research side of things and go for things that are risky or different or take a pivot in a career direction, because like I've experienced what failure is and it hasn't killed me and I can keep going, right? So
yeah,
I think the more times you fail, the more willing you are to come back to being the newbie that you mentioned, when we were talking about 5 minutes ago about this, right? To go
yeah,
back. And you're more willing to say, well, I can take that risk and have a crack at it.
yeah,
Um, you mentioned it. I think you said like the research is like doing a lot of cool stuff in polymer science, right? If I think about my mantra and what I love, doing, what drives me is to just do cool things, like just have a bunch of really awesome experiences and use that as a model
yeah,
to show my students, to show my kids like what the opportunities are out there, and that you can, put your mind to something big and succeed. And if we think about going back to playing hockey, right,
Yeah.
for USA, that's probably a perfect moment because it's got everything in that story of, you know, diving into something that's a bit scary, pivoting. I retired. So yeah, 2018, I retired from the Australian hockey team. Moved countries, started a postdoc, had my first child. It went from 30 degrees Celsius summer in Australia to like minus 15 or something we landed into in Chicago. Like it was ridiculous. So yeah, a lot of flux, a lot of change in 2018 for us as a family. We then go through COVID, in the US, just our family together pretty much is what we had because everyone's back in Australia. And then
Yeah.
we come out of that. I come down here to Southern Miss, start the job as a PI and get the lab up and going. And I reached out to the then US hockey coach of the men's team just because I was interested in helping coach. I was like, well, maybe there's some young goalkeepers I can come on board and just support and be a coach and things like that. And I hadn't even thought about playing again. And this is about 4 years since I've been out of playing. And there's a rule in international field hockey anyway that governs that, if you have dual citizenship, well, you can't just change teams all the time. You've got to sit out for about 3.5 years, I think it is, to then be able to, change nations and play for a different nation. And
Yeah.
so just so happened by chance, I'd taken that 3.5, 4 year hiatus, right, from Australian hockey to then be thinking about the US team. And he found out that I was a dual citizen. And so I came back after chatting with him in California and speaking to Claire. And she's like, no, like we haven't got the time, we haven't got the bandwidth to do it. So I'd ask her the next week and she said no. And then I asked her the next month and she still said no. All this time while I'm trying to get fit again and get ready to get myself in conditioning. And yeah, she finally came around to obviously give me the chance to have a crack at it, right? And
Yeah.
super grateful for that because yeah, it's nice to have played, get back to competitive sport and show that I could still do it and play at that level with the US guys was phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years and now we're in 2025. And the US men's team is really ramping up. They're trying to go for LA 2028. There's some really exciting young prospects as goalkeepers that are in the team now. And I'm this old guy from Mississippi who's like flying into training camps, taking their opportunities away from them, and I just didn't want to be that person, right? I was like, this is not for me. I had my time, like playing for Australia, 8 year career, got to travel the world playing hockey. I had my moment, right? I didn't need
Yeah.
to be sort of stealing that off some young 24, 25 year old who's in his prime trying to chase the his Olympic dream, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be that person. So I sort of, that was easy for me to quit, or I guess, fail at sort of the aim of me going to an Olympic Games because, I think it was in service of others, right? That's what I was looking for.
Love that.
If I think about my original mission, like what drives Tristan Clemons, well, that's what lines up, right? Is to inspire others. And if I'm taking the spot away from someone else, half-assing it from Mississippi, then I'm not doing the right thing in terms of, my personal mission. And so, yeah, bringing it back to where your question really was, is that's how you give yourself permission to take these chances, do these things, have these risks, is really understanding what you want. What does Otito want, or what does Tristan Clemens, what's he about? What does he want to be known as and known for? And then sort of, if the decision is congruent with that or not, kind of decides whether you're on it or not.
I love that. I love how much you make decisions from personal value, and I guess with time we develop that. But I really love the fact that you've been able to develop this strong sense of personal value, and that guides you.
Yeah,
I
and I
would.
also want to say, sorry, just like is it like, yeah, that's as now a 37-year-old who's sort of, starting to figure a few things out, right? I still
Yeah.
haven't figured everything out, no doubt. I still get it wrong all the time, right? I definitely didn't have that sort of, wisdom as a 21, 22-year-old,
Yeah.
But I was fortunate at that time that, I was never really pushed to do anything that I didn't want to do. Like that drive for me to do my PhD, to go to academia, the drive to play hockey for Australia, that was internal, right? I didn't have that push from coaches or, push from my parents or anything like that. They were just super supportive along the way. In fact, I always just felt bad that if I didn't make a team or didn't get, what I was expecting on a grade or something like that, that I was letting them down.
Mm.
And that's the only pressure I felt, but that was kind of internal pressure that I was putting on me.
Yeah.
And so I still remember when I got the call that I wasn't going to go to the Rio Olympics, right? I was on the phone with the coach. I'd just been at a good friend's christening for his son. So I'm outside the church pretty much. And the coach called me to say, hey, you're not going to be one of the reserves traveling to Rio. And Graham Reed's his name, good friend of mine as a coach. And he's crying, I'm crying, and it's just a mess, because we both invested so much in this. Like back to that trust equation, we trusted each other so much in that
Yeah.
relationship, but we both knew how much it meant to me, right? And so that
Yeah.
was a big moment. But then I remember after that calling my mum, right, and having to explain to my mum, and I wasn't going to make it, and she's like, hey, you've given this everything, it's fine, but personally, I just felt like I'd let her down, not from
Yeah.
a pressure standpoint, just because that's what she wants to see me succeed, just as anyone wants their kids to see them succeed. So
That's real. That's real. Very real. Very real. Yeah, touching. I would like to get more into your research and so research was so fascinating to me when I moved to America. So when I was younger, I have these ideas, and then you kind of like brush them off as like, well, it's probably not going to be possible. And then when I came here, I began to see people maybe not fully answering the questions, but trying have a stab at it and like actually trying to figure it out. And that's like, okay, with enough time, these people can figure this out. Maybe some of the ideas we have are actually possible to come true. So I want you to talk about a bit about your research you do. And I know you have two startups now. You're building two startups out, Mangrove Technologies, which is skin regeneration, and the Lumius Technologies, which your grad student, former grad student, is focusing on. What are they about? What are you all building? And how do you also change perspective from academic research to academic startup?
yeah, yeah, I get you. Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, I would say don't lose sight of those ideas you have from when you're younger Otito, right?
Yeah,
Because one of the very first projects that I got to do as a PI, I guess, and with my grad students was something that I had bouncing around in my idea for many many years, right?
yeah,
And we work at the intersection of materials and biology, right? And so I was always fascinated that reactive oxygen species in the body can cause so much damage and challenges, and they're upregulated in disease and cardiovascular disease, cancer. There's they're involved in so many different things, in the body and different pathologies, and so. And then I'm a naive polymer chemist, right? So I'm also like, well, we use radicals to make polymers all the time, and I'm like, well, there's radicals in the body, and we want to make polymers, like let's try and do that together. And that was something that inspired very first projects, and we're still interested in that space and reactive oxygen species biology, but how to use that to sort of modulate materials, right, in one aspect of sort of being able to treat diseases. In terms of research and how we sort of decide on projects and academically versus what we're trying to translate into companies and those things, we're sort of driven by problems, right? That's what governs how my lab operates. And there's labs that work really basic. So basic research, we're talking about things that we don't even know what they're useful for, but enabling technologies or enabling methods and things like that. We probably don't sit right on the basic end. We sit a little bit further in, thinking about more applied research or close to that applied space. So and so we're excited by good problems, right? And so if I think about where the startups have gone that we've got going, Mangrove Materials was one that has really been pushed out around spray-on skin technology. So how can we spray cells out over a wound bed and make sure those cells stay where they're put, right? Well, that's a perfect polymer problem. That's a perfect rheology problem, right?
yeah,
Where you need this material to be able to go through the high shear of a nozzle and then recreate a scaffold really quickly to hold those cells in place. Well, you want that scaffold to not just be a scaffold. Can it be, pro-regenerative? Can it be antioxidant, like I was mentioning before?
true.
Can it be actually degradable and biocompatible over time, right? For different
Yeah,
injuries, for different disease states. And that's really the main thrust of mangrove. Um, the Lumios one is interesting actually. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. So I'm leading Mangrove with some grad students here on campus. It's been going really well.
nice.
Lumios is one that Evan, one of my first grad students, is taken off with, and he's leading that as the CEO. And that's focused on developing precursor chemistries for carbon fiber applications. Really excited about that just because of the opportunity we can see there in terms of improving the economics of carbon fiber, but also the capabilities of just performance of carbon fiber. Yeah, I'm just keen to see where that goes next. And just because I can see the growth potential in carbon fiber as well as opportunities go for high strength, lightweight materials. Yeah, it's super exciting. The genesis of that project, though, is pretty interesting. We were weeks away from scrapping it, right? It was interesting that we couldn't get it to work. We couldn't get the solubility right for some of our NMR characterization, and it didn't look like it was going in the right direction. Without giving away too much of the secret sauce, but the opportunity that solved it for us was putting some salt in our NMR buffers essentially to actually get nice clean spectra. And then once we figured that out, everything was showing what we expected, and off it went. And super cool to think. And we look back on that pretty fondly now that we're into this company stage. We're starting to move in the right directions. That if you take that back 3.5 years ago, it was a moment of, if you don't bring this data to me in 3 weeks, we're done, right? We're moving
Mm.
everything. So to think how close it was to the chopping block to where it's at now is pretty interesting.
Very interesting. I just want to ask him before I go back to the technology for mangrove, and I just want to ask for the carbon fiber because I know carbon fiber is not like a specific biomaterial. It is just a regular high performance material. So how do you all, and I know you all do a lot of work in biomaterials, so how do you end up working in
Yeah,
technology for carbon fiber?
great question as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I came, naive first year assistant professor, right? You got all your ideas, things you want to do. Most of them don't work, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's research, and so and Evan won't mind me telling this story. So his project was around developing targeted nucleic acid delivery vectors. So how can we deliver nucleic acid therapies for cancer, for heart disease, different disease states, and
yeah,
we just couldn't get it to work. He couldn't get the chemistry to work. It wasn't, when you write it out as a reaction scheme, everything works perfectly, right? But when
yeah,
you're actually trying to do it, we just kept bumping into challenges. But along that way, we learned a lot about controlled radical polymerization methods, and what really got us into the carbon fiber side. And as I said, my lab was 100% biomaterials, right?
yeah,
This piece has started to grow off the side, focused on carbon fiber. Um, but what got us started there was the problem, right? And the problem came from, well, if you think about how carbon or polyacrylonitrile, which is the polymer that goes in to make carbon fiber,
yeah,
it's used industrially in a range of different things, huge kind of megaton produced polymer around the world, right?
yeah,
Well, it's one of these unique polymers where the polarity change between the monomer and the polymer is pretty vast. And so if you want to get to high molecular weights of that polymer, you can't do it in the bulk. You can't polymerize it in its own monomer. So you need to have solvent to be able to do that. And the solvents they currently use are pretty, toxic and expensive, like dimethylformamide or DMSO and things like that, right? So
yeah,
we kind of looked at that and said, well, that's a problem, right? This is a polymer that the world needs, the polymer, the world uses a lot of. But we have to do it by a solution phase that's kind of using these organic solvents. Can we change that? Can we get away from it, right? And that was the moment that pushed us in the right direction, I guess, to think about an aqueous-based process. So using water in that chemistry to sort of improve that processing there. And that was the genesis of the idea.
very interesting. Very, very cool. I love that. I love to see how research evolves and finds its ways to very useful technologies and applications that you might not have thought of in the first place. And so I want to go back to mangrove and like it's like people see Dr. Clemens, he has a startup, he has two startups he's working on, and people kind of romanticize this end goal of, oh, if I become a PI, I'll have this startup at the cutting edge of technology. I would like to know how long has he taken and what has the day-to-day been like?
Yeah. Well, so mangrove is cool, right? And the spray on skin technology isn't my idea. I also want to say, like, I don't want to romanticize it, right? Both of these companies are like three people, right? So they're very small. We're kind of like bootstrapping, figuring this out as we go, right? So
Yeah,
people talk about the valley of death. We still haven't even got looking at that yet to sort of think about crossing it. So we're on the very front edge still, right? But it is exciting, and I'm excited about it for sure. Um, you know, the spray on skin story is actually pretty interesting, right? So
yeah,
it's and it ties in with mentors. So one of my right up there for me mentors from a scientific standpoint is a phenomenal burn surgeon, Fiona Wood. Fiona, was a burn surgeon in Australia back in the hometown where I grew up in Perth, Western Australia, where I was doing my research. And as in my first postdoc as a fellow for the National Health and Medical Research Council in Australia, she was my mentor on that project, and we were looking to develop agents that were for, reorganizing scar tissue to be more like healthy tissue. And she also, in a decade before that, had developed this technology that is now a fully FDA approved device for spraying a patient's own cells back onto a wound, right? Well, the challenge that can come from that is, well, let's think about if we want to maintain those cells there and do that well, can we hold them in place, right? And that's where we thought about this scaffold. So this idea, has been something that has been in my mind since 12, 2013, 2014 when I was working with Fiona back then, right?
Yeah.
It's just that I'd never had the opportunity to have, the lab space, the materials, right, to actually go about chasing something like that. And so, you got to fast forward, a decade for me to start to actually do that work. And now it's probably going to take another, at least 5 or 6 years to start thinking about putting that into patients if everything goes well along that timeline, right? Because to get it there, but that's how progress works, right? And I think what's exciting for me is you mentioned it before. This was an idea we had a long, long time ago, and is now finally coming to fruition, which is what makes it really exciting.
Well, I love that. Lovely to hear. I hope one day my ideas can also come to fruition. Really, really inspiring. There's a question in the chat from my friend Juan Pablo, and he says, what has been the biggest lesson in your learned in your PhD, and how has that snapped your life today? I want to have a clear mind on what I should look to learn and do as an independent scientist in my academic years to really use the opportunity to grow.
Yeah. So I mean, so great question, and thank you for that. The thing that you learn during a PhD is you get some domain specific skills, right? So first of all, you're doing a PhD in polymer science. You're going to learn something about polymer science, right? So you're going to have some, there are fundamentals that you need to have, right? So there is that baseline sort of, knowledge acquisition aspect, right? The thing I think you also learn a lot about in a PhD is failure, right? You learn how to fail a lot. You know how to you go through 100 experiments not going well, and then being able to sort of come out the other side of that, right? And again, I mentioned Evan and Lumios, like that's the perfect example of, his PhD was the first couple of years of experiments going wrong, a pivot, and then experiments going right. And if he hadn't have gone through that challenge of those first few years of things not going in the right direction, maybe we don't find that, right? Desperation breeds creativity, right? And that's kind of where that project took off from. So I think it helps you learn how to deal with failure, right? It helps you bounce back from failure. That's definitely ingrained in a PhD. The thing I'm concerned about, if you think about PhDs in education, and this is all in flux at the moment, is like how does AI come in and sort of disrupt that and change that, right? Because there's something to be said for doing the work and going through, the challenges of writing a paper, writing a document, right? And getting it right and figuring those things out instead
Yeah.
of being able to sort of put that in AI and get it sort of 75%-ish good and that being acceptable, being good enough, right? I think there's some art that still needs to be learned in those spaces that you get through doing the work, right? And going through that personally and making that work. But um, yeah, for me, the number one skill I think you get from going through a PhD is, well, two things. You get network. I love seeing the Southern Miss, network of, alumni that are out there doing things, connecting with our current students and helping
Yeah.
with employment and those things. That's one that shouldn't get discounted. And the other one is definitely the ability to learn how to deal with, failure, pick yourself back up off the mat, dust yourself off, and go for it again. Yeah.
I love that. Love that. I hope that was good insight for you, Juan Pablo. We have another question in the chat from Zacchaeus Wallace. Zach is asking, he said, from the perspective of a PI and having been through a PhD, what separates a good PhD student from a great one?
Great question, Zach. So Zach was one of my undergrads in the lab, actually. So I appreciate you coming on and yeah, great question. I don't know. I guess it depends what you define a great PhD student to be. And I think the thing that I am thinking about for me personally is that like I'm so proud of my grad students, right? I'm so proud of all my students, to be honest, right? Right now, I'm in the moment of preparing my documents for promotion and tenure. That's due for me at the end of the summer, and so it's been fun reflecting because I've just thought about Zach yesterday as I'm writing him into my like dossier about the things that he achieved when he was a student here as an undergraduate. And so I'm super proud of him. But really, the proof is in the pudding, for me in a decade from now, right? When my students are out there doing great things, that'll be the metric of, did I succeed or not as a PI in terms of helping them get to where they need to go next. In terms of things that are important for a great graduate student, though, there are some kind of non-negotiables, maybe, right? Um, one, there has to be that relationship of trust, right? You got to trust that your PI is, thinking about you and trying to help you get to your next level, because my job, like as a leader, is to make you feel uncomfortable, right? It's to make you do things that you don't know how to do yet. It's to, help you get to those levels that you're not comfortable with, right? And if you're not willing to get out of your comfort zone, if you're not willing to let me push you to those places, which comes with trust, right? That's when you allow me to do that. Is if you trust me, then it's going to be hard for me to get you to the growth that I could see or the potential there, right? So I think that's number one, super important. You got to trust and have that relationship of trust with your PI. You got to be curious, right? You got to be willing to ask questions, right? Definitely how I operate in my lab is that you can't just be expecting me to tell you which experiment to do over and over again, right? You got to be curious and coming up with your own directions, your own ideas, and solving your own problems as you go, because that's a key for a PhD. And finally, you got to be willing to do the work, right? There's no substitute for hard work, and I think that that's something I'm really aware of right now, and keeping an eye out for. I guess in like society maybe is a way to think about it. I've been really ruminating on this, but there is no substitute for the work, right? Everyone sees TikTok, Instagram, the finished product, but not often do you see what it takes to get there, right? And I think a PhD is no different, right? You talk about the awards and the accolades that might go on a CV or the papers that are published, but that takes grit, that takes time in the lab, that takes failed experiments, and you got to be willing to push through those things, and that comes from hard work. So, Zach, hope that answers your question, mate.
Great, great, great answer, Dr. Clemens. And I hope, Zach, you got more insights from the response. We got another question relating to venture, actually. Venture is a field I'm really interested in. What are the most viable options for pursuing a venture startup? This is from Christopher Scallon. So, what are the most viable options for pursuing a venture startup with defined exit strategies versus building a long-term career in manufacturing using commodity materials? And how do the risk reward timeline and value creation profiles differ across these paths? I know you're getting pretty new into the space, but if you what are your perspectives in this?
Yeah, great question as well. Thanks, Chris. Well, it really for me it boils down to risk appetite, right? Like and I guess like risk tolerance, because I would say I have a big risk appetite, but there's other things I have to take into consideration now, right? Like 25-year-old Tristan could jump at those opportunities and go for it. 37-year-old Tristan has to also consider, his wife, kids, the stability of those things and the importance of making sure as a provider that I'm able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so I've got, there's more things in my sort of ethos that I have to worry about now, or think about, as I'm, yeah, assessing risk in those respects. Um, I think there's also what aligns with your personal mission and your values, right? Like, I mean, I love doing exciting things. I love doing things that are interesting, and entrepreneurship and startups are kind of the way I can sort of feed that part of me.
Yeah.
Now that I can't play elite sport, right, where you're in competition. As a company, you're in competition as well. It's just like going head to head with the best in the world, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm approaching it in that aspect as well. Um, the thing about the entrepreneur side is that, I'm sort of dipping my toe in that while I'm still, doing research as a PI and things at the moment, So I think for me personally, I'm able to sort of, it means I've got to work harder, right? Because I'm not just one hand focused on one thing. I've got to be doing the research, doing the teaching, what's required of me as a faculty member, while also thinking about that, the opportunities for the companies. But I'm happy to balance those things and do the work at the moment because that fits for my risk tolerance maybe in those sort of decisions. I think the world's very different now. If you had have asked that question 30 years ago, 20 years ago, then yeah, you'd go the established route because that's kind of how the big machine works. But I think we've seen so many exciting startups and the ability to get venture capital money in quickly to make things move fast that, that opportunity is real. And I think, again, if it's something you're looking at jumping at, I would get some mentors, talk to some people that have been through it in that space and, do a little bit of research due diligence before you sort of make a jump. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely answer. Lovely answer. Venture is something I'm very much interested in. So really interested in that intersection of technology, venture, and whether to go industry, start your own. So really, really cool. Do we have any more questions from the chat? This is the time, audience, if you have any more questions. Um, Okay, we have one from Caleb. Thanks so much, Tito and Dr. Clemens. Did you still pursue your other passions and skills during your PhD? Why or why not? If you could go back to your PhD and change anything in that aspect, what would you?
Great question. Yeah. I wouldn't change it. No. First of all, I think yeah. So I played hockey. So I made my debut for Australia 2011. I was just starting my PhD at that time. So I've pretty much as a scientist, so PhD onwards, have always had hockey on the side, and done both of those things at the same time. And I've always said this that I think I was a better scientist because of my hockey, and I reckon I was a better hockey player because of my science. And the reason for that is, so my PhD, for example, we were looking at trying to develop targeted polymeric nanoparticles for drug delivery. We looked at cancer. We're looking at heart disease for some of our work, and it's easy to get motivated for that work when everyone's got a story that touches with cancer, right? Everyone has a family or a friend that's sort of been impacted by cancer. So it's easy to sort of understand the why and the meaning of the work you're doing, right? When you get in the lab or turning up on weekends to make things happen, right? But what was important for me in that respect is that, okay, you say you're looking to go to a big tournament and you don't get picked. Okay, that's disappointing, but it's really easy to then go throw yourself in the lab and understand and go for something that you're passionate about and has meaning for you. So I didn't dwell too long on not getting selected or anything because I could jump into those sorts of opportunities and get back into my research. And likewise, the other way around, you have a frustrating day in the lab or you have a week where everything fails. I could go out in the hockey pitch with my mates and dig in, right? And really just have fun, play sport, get active, get the endorphins out of just being fit and healthy and those things. And so that balance, I reckon, I would have been worse if I had a, and I've learned this about myself, if I was to be all in on one or the other, right? And I think that's sort of is something I've learned about me personally that I need to have this balance, otherwise I go a bit stir crazy. And I think for me now, the companies are providing that other piece that for me it's fun. I mean, I just enjoy thinking about those opportunities and thinking about solving those problems, and it's different to what I do for my general paycheck and what I have to do for work in the lab, as a research PI. So yeah, I wouldn't change it. The interesting thing that changed during that time in my PhD, I had an offer to go play in the European leagues where you could have got paid to play, and I thought about going to do my PhD in Europe right at the start of starting my PhD. Again, I sought out some conversations with some mentors at the time, and one of those was the current Australian coach, and he said, "Look, I think you should stay around. I think there's opportunities for you on the horizon." And then 12 months later, I made my debut for Australia. And so to think if I had have been out of the country doing my PhD somewhere else, maybe the trajectory is different, but maybe that would have impacted my chances to have played for Australia. And so that's a decision that I made through consulting others that had the right advice at the right time for me.
Great, great, great. Caleb, I hope your questions were kind of answered. And I kind of get the context behind Caleb's questions because he also plays soccer on the side. He also plays soccer on the side. We used to play soccer together in Boston. So that's really cool. Final question. We got one from Moses. He says, if a PhD student works on a project that you obtained a patent on, do they also get shares in the startup? The intellectual property is rewarded with their PhD degree, or is the intellectual property just rewarded with their PhD degree?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the short answer is yes. So anyone that's involved in the inventorship is involved in that pattern, right? So even if the ideation came from the PI, if that was also influenced by the graduate student, so if you figured out this project together, or undergraduate, right? Whoever's involved in the ideation and the demonstration of that technology are involved in that IP, right? So yeah, and I think in terms of the value of that, it's definitely changing as well in the ecosystem, right? Even for me as a professor, if you go back a decade, maybe 15 years ago, the metrics for us were, presentations at conferences, papers published in high impact factor journals, and, like money coming in, winning research grants, students graduating, those sorts of metrics. Entrepreneurship, patents, intellectual property for the university, trade secrets, those things are starting to become more and more valuable. As I think universities start to learn about the economic benefits of these things that are sort of spinning out and generating from their universities. So that means it's valuable for the student as well as valuable for the PIs to be thinking about these opportunities as well. Because it is starting to see the value of it, in terms of what it can do for the economy. And the reality is most of our research is funded by taxpayer dollars, right? It's funded by the American government, and so we got to make sure we're doing things that spin back out and actually help in that respect as well.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Oh, it's been a great session. Catching up with you, understanding the whys behind the whats you have been able to pursue in your career. Very eye-opening as we all in the audience try to make these decisions for ourselves. I'm personally trying to weigh my interest in bioelectronics as well as my interest in venture and other media as well. So this has definitely provided a lot more insights and just more scenarios to which we can think of. And I really appreciate you accepting this invite to just come and talk about your life. I really appreciate you. And to everyone that has been on this live Zoom, thank you so much for taking out the time to actually listen to what we have to offer and asking questions, engaging with the content. I really appreciate you, and I hope everybody watching this on YouTube, listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcast inspired, but also lives here with maybe not just answers, but with more questions that kind of guide the way that would open doors to and opportunities, viewpoints to how you kind of go about your life. But thank you, everyone. At this point, we've come to the end of this podcast. Appreciate everybody, and we'll be ending it right now.
Appreciate it. Hey, Otito, thank you, man. Thank you for your time. Enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right. Okay, everybody. Bye.